The kitchen clock showed 6 in the morning when Linda arrived at the Ashford mansion. She pushed through the service entrance, her shoulders already tired before the day had even begun. At 51 years old, her body reminded her every morning that scrubbing floors and hauling laundry baskets wasn't getting any easier. "You're late." Mrs. Ashford's voice cut through the quiet kitchen like a knife. The woman stood by the marble island, already dressed in an expensive pantsuit, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the counter. Linda glanced at the clock again. She was actually 3 minutes early, but she'd learned long ago not to argue with Mrs. Ashford. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll start right away. See that you do. We're hosting the charity gala tonight. 200 guests. Everything must be absolutely perfect." Mrs. Ashford's eyes swept over Linda with barely hidden distaste. "And please stay out of sight once the guests arrive. I don't want any awkwardness," Linda nodded and watched Mrs. Ashford click away on her designer heels. Awkwardness, that was the word rich people used when they didn't want to admit they were embarrassed by the people who cleaned up after them. She tied on her apron and got to work. The mansion had 12 bathrooms, 8 bedrooms, 3 living areas, and a ballroom that could fit Linda's entire apartment inside it twice over. By noon, her knees ached from kneeling and her hands were raw from cleaning solutions. The catering truck started arriving around 2 in the afternoon. Men in white jackets carried in trays of expensive food, while florists transformed the ballroom into something out of a fairy tale. Linda stayed in the background, refilling cleaning supplies and making sure the guest bathrooms had fresh towels arranged just the way Mrs. Ashford liked them. Around 4 o'clock, she found herself in the ballroom, wiping down the last of the windowsills. That's when she saw it. The piano. A gorgeous Steinway grand piano sat in the corner, its black surface so polished she could see her reflection in it. Her heart did a little jump in her chest, the way it always did when she saw a beautiful instrument. She glanced around. No one was watching. Her fingers itched. Just one key, she thought. Just to hear the tone. She reached out and gently pressed middle C. The sound was perfect, rich and clear and heartbreaking. This piano probably cost more than Linda would earn in 10 years, and she'd bet anything the Ashfords barely touched it. It was just furniture to them. Expensive decoration, the piano stays dust-free, correct? A voice behind her made Linda jump. Mrs. Ashford's daughter, Chelsea, stood in the doorway eyeing Linda suspiciously. "Yes, miss. I was just finishing up." Linda pulled her hand back quickly. Chelsea was 24, fresh out of some prestigious university, and had her mother's same look of casual superiority. "Mother says I'll be performing tonight, Chopin. I've been practicing for weeks." "That's lovely, miss." Linda picked up her cleaning supplies and hurried out. Her heart was still pounding. She shouldn't have touched the piano. That wasn't for people like her. Not anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Mr. Ashford came home around 5, barely glancing at Linda as she polished the banister near the entrance. He was a big man with silver hair and an expensive watch that probably cost more than Linda's car. He'd made his money in real estate, buying up properties and turning them into luxury developments. Linda had heard the other staff talking about how he'd displaced dozens of families from affordable housing to build condos for millionaires. At 6 o'clock, Linda changed into a fresh uniform. The old one was soaked with sweat and cleaning solution. She caught a glimpse of herself in the bathroom mirror. When had she gotten so old? When had the lines around her eyes gotten so deep? She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. There had been a time when she looked in mirrors and saw someone different. Someone confident. Someone whose hands created beauty instead of just scrubbing away dirt. But that was another lifetime. Before the hospital bills. Before the debt collectors. Before everything fell apart. The guests started arriving at 7. Linda watched from the kitchen window as luxury cars pulled up one after another. Women in gowns that cost thousands of dollars. Men in tuxedos. Everyone dripping with jewelry and confidence and that easy comfort that came from never having to worry about money. Mrs. Ashford had hired extra servers for the night, young people in crisp uniforms who carried trays of champagne and tiny expensive appetizers. Linda's job was to stay invisible, to deal with any problems in the background, to make sure the trash was emptied and the bathrooms stayed pristine while the party went on. She could hear music drifting from the ballroom. A string quartet played classical pieces while people mingled and laughed. Linda found herself drawn to the service hallway that ran behind the ballroom. There was a small door there, usually locked, but tonight it stood slightly open, so the catering staff could move back and forth quickly. Through the crack, Linda could see the party. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. The guests clustered in small groups, their voices blending into a hum of privilege and self-satisfaction. And there, in the corner, sat the piano, waiting. "Stunning turnout, Victoria," someone said loudly, and Linda recognized Mrs. Ashford's delighted laugh. "We do try to support important causes," Mrs. Ashford replied in that fake modest voice that fooled no one. This whole party was about showing off. The charity was just an excuse. Linda should have walked away. She had work to do, but something kept her there, watching through that crack in the door. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was the sight of that beautiful piano. Or maybe it was just that after years of being invisible, she wanted to remember what it felt like to be part of something beautiful, even if only as an observer. The string quartet finished their set and took a break. Mrs. Ashford clinked a knife against her champagne glass, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat tonight. My daughter Chelsea has prepared a performance for us. She'll be playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Chelsea walked to the piano with practiced grace, smiling at the guests. She sat down, arranged her dress carefully, and began to play. The notes were correct. Technically, Chelsea hit all the right keys in all the right order, but there was something missing. The music felt flat, mechanical, like someone reading words off a page without understanding what they meant. Linda could hear it even from her hiding spot in the hallway. This was a girl who'd had expensive lessons her whole life, but had never felt the music in her bones. Still, when Chelsea finished, the guests applauded enthusiastically. They probably couldn't tell the difference. Or maybe they could, but it didn't matter. This was about connections and social standing, not about art. Linda started to turn away, to head back to the kitchen where she belonged. But then she heard Mrs. Ashford's voice again, sharper this time, cutting through the applause. "Oh, everyone, I just had the most amusing idea." Something in that tone made Linda's stomach drop. She peered back through the crack in the door and saw Mrs. Ashford looking directly at her. Their eyes met for just a second, and Linda saw the cruel amusement there. This wasn't going to be good. Mrs. Ashford's smile was the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Linda knew that smile. She'd seen it before, usually right before something humiliating happened to someone who couldn't fight back. "Linda," Mrs. Ashford called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Come out here for a moment, would you?" Every head in the ballroom turned toward the service door. Linda felt her face go hot. Her hands started to shake. She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard, to slip back into the kitchen and disappear, but she couldn't, not without making things worse. She pushed through the door and stepped into the ballroom. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto her. Her worn uniform suddenly felt like a spotlight. She could feel them taking in every detail. The cheap fabric, the stains that wouldn't come out no matter how many times she washed it, her sensible shoes with the sole starting to separate on the left one. "Yes, ma'am?" Linda's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Mrs. Ashford gestured grandly toward the piano. "I just learned the most interesting thing about you, Linda. Apparently you used to play piano." "Is that true?" Linda's heart sank. How had she found out? Had someone seen her touch the piano earlier? Yes, ma'am. A long time ago. Wonderful." Mrs. Ashford clapped her hands together. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. "Then you simply must play something for us, I insist. It would be so entertaining." There it was. That word, entertaining. Linda understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. Mrs. Ashford wanted her to fail in front of all these people, wanted to watch the maid embarrass herself, wanted everyone to see the natural order of things confirmed, that people like Linda belonged in the kitchen, not at a piano. "Mrs. Ashford, I really don't think—" Linda started. "Nonsense," Mrs. Ashford cut her off. "You're being modest. Come now, surely you remember something, even just a simple tune." Her tone was encouraging, but her eyes were hard. This wasn't a request. It was a command. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and staring at their drinks, but others wore expressions of curious amusement. This was going to be a show, the kind of story they'd tell at their next dinner party. Chelsea stood near the piano, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She looked like someone watching a car accident about to happen. Mr. Ashford had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, but he didn't say anything. He never did. Linda's mind raced. She could refuse. Walk out right now, quit this job and leave with whatever dignity she had left. But she needed this job. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Her car needed new brakes. She couldn't afford to make enemies with people like the Ashfords. They had connections. One bad reference could make it impossible to find other work. She looked at the piano. That beautiful, neglected instrument. Part of her, the part she'd buried deep down for the last 7 years, whispered that she should do it. Not for them. For herself. For the music that used to live in her hands. All right, Linda heard herself say. I'll play something. She walked toward the piano, each step feeling like she was moving through water. The crowd parted to let her pass, and she could hear their whispers. Some were laughing already, getting ready to be entertained by her failure. Linda sat down on the piano bench. The seat was exactly the right height, perfectly adjusted. Of course it was. Everything in this house was perfect, at least on the surface. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, feeling the weight of 200 stairs pressing down on her shoulders. Her fingers looked old, rough. The nails were short and practical, nothing like the polished ones belonging to the women in this room. These were hands that scrubbed toilets and mopped floors. These were hands that society had decided weren't meant for creating beauty anymore. But Linda remembered what these hands used to do. She remembered concert halls and standing ovations. She remembered the feeling of music flowing through her like electricity, like prayer, like breathing, before her husband got sick, before the medical bills started piling up like snow in a blizzard, before she had to sell everything, including her own piano, just to keep the lights on and pay for treatments that didn't work anyway. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. When she opened them again, something had shifted inside her. If they wanted a show, she'd give them one. Not the show they were expecting, though. Linda lifted her hands to the keys. She let them rest there for a moment, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. The room went completely quiet. Someone coughed. Someone else giggled nervously. Then she began to play. She chose Rachmaninoff, the prelude in C-sharp minor. Most people called it the Bells because of the way it started. It was one of the most technically difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. Most professional pianists spent months preparing it for performance. It required power, precision, and soul. Linda's fingers struck the opening chord with perfect force. The sound exploded through the ballroom like thunder. 3 notes, played with such intensity that several people actually jumped. And then the magic happened. Linda's hands moved across the keys with a speed and confidence that seemed impossible. Her fingers flew through the cascading runs, each note crystal clear and perfectly placed. The music swelled and crashed like waves against rocks. It was angry and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. The laughter stopped immediately. The smirks vanished. People who had been looking at their phones suddenly couldn't look away. The whispers died completely. Mrs. Ashford's face had gone pale. Her mouth hung slightly open. Chelsea looked like someone had slapped her. The confidence in her posture crumbled as she realized she was watching something she could never achieve, no matter how many expensive lessons her parents bought her. Linda didn't notice any of them. She was somewhere else now. She was back in Boston, performing for the first time after winning the regional competition. She was at her husband Tom's bedside, playing his favorite pieces on the digital keyboard they could barely afford, watching him smile through the pain. She was at his funeral, unable to touch a piano for months afterward because every note reminded her of everything she'd lost. All of that pain, all of that love, all of those years of silence poured out through her fingers now. The piano sang beneath her hands. It was like the instrument had been waiting its whole life for someone to play it properly. The sound filled every corner of the room, so powerful that Linda could feel it vibrating in her chest. She moved through the middle section, the melody shifting from aggressive to achingly tender. Her left hand provided a steady, haunting bass line, while her right hand danced through the higher registers. The contrast was stunning. Several people in the audience had tears in their eyes, though they probably couldn't have explained why. One man near the front pulled out his phone and started recording. Others followed suit. Within seconds, a dozen phones were pointed at Linda, capturing this moment. The maid at the piano, the woman they'd been ready to laugh at, creating something none of them could have imagined. Linda built toward the climax. her whole body moving with the music now. The piece demanded everything from her physically, emotionally, spiritually. Her arms ached. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her fingers never faltered. They remembered everything. Every lesson, every practice session, every performance. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath years of scrubbing and cleaning and surviving. The final section arrived like a storm. The music grew darker, more intense, building to a devastating conclusion. Linda's hands crashed down on the keys with controlled violence, pulling every ounce of power from the instrument. And then, the final chord. She struck it with perfect timing and weight, letting it ring through the ballroom. The sound hung in the air, gradually fading into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Linda sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, suddenly aware again of where she was, of who was watching, of what she'd just done. The silence stretched on. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then someone started clapping. The applause started with one person. Then 2. Then suddenly the entire ballroom erupted. People weren't just clapping politely anymore. They were on their feet, some of them shouting, others wiping tears from their eyes. The sound was deafening. Linda sat frozen at the piano, her hands trembling now that the music had stopped. She couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to fumble through some simple melody while they laughed. She was supposed to confirm everything they believed about people like her, but instead they were giving her a standing ovation. Incredible, someone shouted from the back. Absolutely incredible. People started pressing forward, surrounding the piano. Linda felt overwhelmed, trapped. She tried to stand, but her legs felt weak. A woman in a glittering gold dress grabbed her hand. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The woman demanded, her eyes wide with excitement. "That was extraordinary. I studied a long time ago," Linda managed to say. "Studied where?" Another guest chimed in. "Juilliard, Curtis?" Before Linda could answer, an older man pushed through the crowd. He had silver hair and wore an expensive suit, but his face was kind. There was something familiar about him, though Linda couldn't place it at first. "Good Lord," the man said, staring at Linda with an expression of complete shock. "Linda Chen? Is that really you?" Linda's heart stopped. Nobody had called her by her full name in years. Here she was just Linda. Linda the maid. Linda who scrubbed floors. "Not Linda Chen, concert pianist. I'm sorry, do I know you?" Linda asked, though recognition was starting to dawn. "Professor Harrison," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the conservatory. I taught your advanced technique class. You won the Northeastern Regional Competition in 2015. You were one of the most talented students I ever had the privilege of teaching." The crowd went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. People were pulling out their phones, typing frantically. "Linda Chen pianist" into search engines. Within seconds, results started popping up. Old articles. Performance videos. Competition wins. A woman gasped as she looked at her phone screen. "Oh my God. She performed at Symphony Hall multiple times. There are reviews calling her a rising star. She won international competitions," someone else read aloud from their phone. Boston Globe called her a pianist of exceptional sensitivity and technical mastery. The murmurs grew louder. People were showing each other their phone screens, their expressions shifting from surprise to confusion, to something that looked almost like shame. Mrs. Ashford stood in the corner, her face the color of old cheese. She looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Chelsea had disappeared entirely, probably slipped away to avoid the embarrassment. Professor Harrison took Linda's hands in his. His eyes were wet. "What happened to you? You were headed for a major career. Everyone said so. You just vanished. We tried to find you, but it was like you disappeared off the face of the earth." Linda felt the tears coming now, and she couldn't stop them. 7 years of holding everything in, of pushing down all the pain and loss came flooding out. "My husband got sick," she said, her voice breaking. "Tom, he was diagnosed with ALS. Do you know what that costs? Even with insurance, we burned through everything. Our savings, the retirement fund. I had to cancel my performances to take care of him. By the time he passed, I was buried in debt. Over $200,000 in medical bills." The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. "I had to sell my piano," Linda continued, the words tumbling out now that she'd started. My beautiful Steinway that my grandmother left me. The one I'd played since I was 6 years old. I sold it for a fraction of what it was worth because I needed the money fast. I sold everything. And it still wasn't enough. Professor Harrison looked devastated. Linda, why didn't you reach out? The conservatory has emergency funds for alumni. There are organizations that help musicians in crisis. We could have— I couldn't, Linda interrupted, shaking her head. I was drowning. Every day was just about survival. Just getting through the next 24 hours. I couldn't think beyond that. And honestly, after Tom died, I couldn't bear to play. Every time I sat at a piano, all I could think about was playing for him in the hospital, watching him fade away. The music felt tainted, ruined. So I stopped. I got a job cleaning houses because it was the only thing I could find that paid cash under the table while I was dealing with the debt collectors. A woman in a red dress stepped forward. She looked to be in her 60s, elegant and poised. I'm Patricia Morrison, she said. I run the Arts Emergency Fund. We provide grants and support for artists facing hardship. I had no idea you were here in the city working like this. This is exactly the situation our organization was created to address. Another man spoke up. I'm with the Musicians Union. We have resources too. Legal help for debt negotiation, health insurance assistance, even temporary housing if needed. Linda looked around at all these faces. Wealthy, powerful people who minutes ago had been ready to laugh at her humiliation. Now they were offering help. But was it real? Or was it just guilt? Just rich people trying to feel better about themselves after being caught in their own cruelty? I don't understand, Linda said quietly. 10 minutes ago I was invisible to all of you. I was just the help. Just someone to ignore or mock. Now suddenly everyone cares? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several people had the decency to look ashamed. One woman actually put her hand over her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Professor Harrison squeezed her hands gently. You're right, and that's something we all need to reckon with. But Linda, please don't let our failure to see you earlier stop you from accepting help now. You have a gift. The world needs your music. I need you to believe that. Mrs. Ashford finally found her voice. I think perhaps we should all give Linda some space, she said stiffly, trying to regain control of her own party. This has been very unexpected. Actually, I'd like to hear more, Patricia Morrison said coolly, not even looking at Mrs. Ashford. She kept her eyes on Linda. I want to know what we can do to help you get back on your feet. Proper housing, time to practice and rebuild your repertoire, connections to booking agents and concert venues. The conservatory would love to have you on faculty, Professor Harrison added eagerly. We need someone with your experience and talent to teach the next generation. The pay is decent and you'd have access to all our practice facilities, private rooms with excellent instruments. Linda felt dizzy. This was too much, too fast. An hour ago she'd been cleaning toilets. Now people were offering her jobs, money, opportunities. Part of her wanted to say yes to everything. But another part, the part that had been beaten down by years of struggle, was suspicious. Why now? She asked. Why do I matter now that you know who I used to be? There are thousands of people cleaning houses and serving food and parking cars who have talents you never see, who have dreams they had to give up, who are barely surviving. Why am I special just because I can play piano? The question made several people shift uncomfortably. Patricia Morrison smiled sadly. You're absolutely right. And that's a failing of our society that we need to address. But Linda, I can't help everyone tonight. I can help you. Please let us. Not because you're more deserving than anyone else, but because you're here, and we have the power to make a difference in your life right now. Professor Harrison nodded. And maybe once you're stable again, you can help others. You know what it's like to be invisible. You could be an advocate, a voice for artists who fall through the cracks. Linda looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just created something beautiful, the same hands that scrubbed floors every day. Both things were true. Both things were part of who she was now. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all happening so fast. Of course, Patricia said warmly. She pulled a business card from her purse. Call me tomorrow, or the next day. Whenever you're ready, the offer stands. Professor Harrison did the same, pressing his card into Linda's palm. Others followed suit until Linda was holding a small stack of cards from people who wanted to help, to hire her, to give her a second chance. Mrs. Ashford watched all of this with barely concealed fury. Her attempt to humiliate Linda had backfired spectacularly. Instead of putting the maid in her place, she'd exposed her own cruelty to everyone who mattered in her social circle. As the crowd finally began to disperse, returning to their champagne and conversations, Linda remained at the piano. She ran her fingers over the keys one more time, playing a soft, simple chord. For the first time in 7 years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Linda didn't sleep that night. She sat in her tiny studio apartment, staring at the stack of business cards on her kitchen table. The cards looked out of place next to her bills and grocery store coupons. 2 different worlds that didn't quite fit together. Her phone had been buzzing all night. Somehow someone at the party had posted the video online. By midnight it had 10,000 views. By morning it was over 1 million. The comment section was a mix of amazement and outrage. This woman is a genius and she's been cleaning houses? The way that rich lady tried to humiliate her and it totally backfired. Beautiful. This is what's wrong with our country. Talented people struggling while mediocre rich kids get everything handed to them. Linda read through the comments with a strange detachment, like she was reading about someone else's life. In a way, she was. The woman in that video seemed confident, powerful. Linda didn't feel like that woman. She felt tired and scared and overwhelmed. Around 7 in the morning, her phone actually rang. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed Professor Harrison's name. Hello? Her voice was hoarse from not sleeping. Linda, I hope I'm not calling too early. Professor Harrison sounded energized, excited. Have you seen the video? You're everywhere. CBS News wants to interview you. So does NPR. This is incredible exposure. Linda's stomach churned. I don't know if I want that kind of attention. I understand, truly I do. But Linda, think about what this could mean. Not just for you, but for other artists struggling in silence. You could be a voice for them. Show people that talent and worth aren't determined by job titles. I just wanted to survive, Linda said quietly. I never asked to be anyone's symbol. There was a pause on the other end. When Professor Harrison spoke again, his voice was gentler. You're right. I'm getting ahead of myself. Listen, forget the media for now. Just come to the conservatory today. See the practice rooms. Play for a while. No pressure, no decisions. Just music. Can you do that? Linda looked around her apartment. The water-stained ceiling. The radiator that clanked all night. The window that didn't quite close, letting in a draft even in summer. What did she have to lose? Okay, she said. What time? 2 hours later, Linda stood outside the conservatory building. She hadn't been here in almost a decade. The red brick facade looked exactly the same. Students hurried past her with instrument cases, chattering about auditions and recitals. They looked so young. Had she ever been that young? Professor Harrison met her at the entrance. He guided her through familiar hallways that felt like walking through a dream. They passed practice rooms where she could hear scales, arpeggios, the messy, beautiful sound of people working on their craft. Here, Professor Harrison said, stopping at a door. This is one of our best rooms. Soundproofed, excellent acoustics. And the piano. He opened the door with a flourish. Inside was a Steinway Model D concert grand. 9 feet of polished perfection. Linda felt her breath catch. Take all the time you need, Professor Harrison said. I'll be in my office. 3rd floor, same as always. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Linda stood there staring at the piano. It had been so long since she'd been alone with an instrument like this. Last night at the Ashfords didn't count. That was survival, adrenaline, anger. This was different. She sat down slowly. The bench was perfectly adjusted. She placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down. Just felt the smoothness under her fingertips. What should she play? Something safe? Something easy to shake off the rust? No, if she was going to do this, she needed to know the truth. She needed to know if last night was a fluke or if the music was really still there. She started with Debussy. Clair de Lune. The piece she'd played at her first real recital when she was 14. The notes came back like muscle memory, like breathing. The music flowed through her, gentle and melancholy and beautiful. Tears ran down her face, but she kept playing. For Tom, who had loved this piece, who had asked her to play it for him in the hospital when the pain got too bad and the morphine made everything fuzzy. She'd played it at his funeral too, though she could barely see the keys through her tears. When she finished, she sat in silence for a moment. Then she played something else. then something else. She lost track of time completely. All the pieces she'd thought she'd forgotten came flooding back. Bach, Chopin, Beethoven, Ravel. Each one felt like greeting an old friend. She didn't hear the door open. Didn't notice Professor Harrison slip in with 3 other people. Didn't realize she had an audience until she finished a particularly difficult listitude and heard applause. Linda spun around on the bench, her face flushing. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was—" "Don't apologize," a woman said. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and elegant silver jewelry. "I'm Dr. Patel, the dean of the conservatory. Professor Harrison asked me to come listen." "Linda, that was remarkable, truly." The other 2 people introduced themselves. One was the head of the piano department. The other was the coordinator of the faculty program. "We'd like to offer you a position," Dr. Patel said simply. "Assistant professor of piano. You'd teach private lessons, coach chamber groups, maybe lead a masterclass each semester. The salary is $58,000 a year plus benefits. Health insurance, retirement contribution, and unlimited access to all our facilities." Linda blinked. $58,000. She currently made about $22,000 cleaning houses with no benefits. No security. No future. I don't have a teaching degree, Linda said. "I never finished my graduate work because we know," Dr. Patel interrupted gently. "And we can work with that. Your performance credentials are more than sufficient. Plus, you have something most teachers don't have. You understand struggle. You know what it's like when life doesn't go according to plan. Our students need teachers who can guide them through success and failure." Linda thought about the students she'd seen in the hallways. Young people with dreams and talent and no idea how fragile it all was. How quickly everything could fall apart. "Can I think about it?" Linda asked. "Of course," Dr. Patel said. "Take a week. 2 weeks. Whatever you need." After they left, Linda sat at the piano for a long time. She thought about the Ashfords. About Mrs. Ashford's cruel smile and the way she'd tried to make Linda into entertainment. About Chelsea's smirk and Mr. Ashford's cowardice. She thought about calling them. Telling them she quit. But then she realized something. She didn't need to. They already knew it was over. There was no way she could go back to cleaning their toilets after what had happened last night. That chapter was closed whether she officially quit or not. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hi Linda, this is Patricia Morrison. I know you need time to think about everything, but I wanted you to know that the Arts Emergency Fund Board met this morning. We've approved a grant for you. $25,000 to help clear your remaining debt and get you settled. No strings attached. You don't have to pay it back. You don't have to do anything except take care of yourself. Call me when you're ready." Linda read the message 3 times. $25,000. It wouldn't clear all her debt, but it would make a massive dent. Combined with a real salary from teaching, she could actually see a way forward. A real future, not just survival. She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, students sat on the lawn talking and laughing. The sun was shining. Birds were singing in the trees. For 7 years, Linda had been invisible. Just a pair of hands that scrubbed and cleaned and served. But last night, she'd reminded herself and everyone else that she was more than that. She was an artist. A musician. A human being with value and dignity. Mrs. Ashford had tried to humiliate her. Instead, she'd given Linda something else entirely. She'd given her an audience. A chance to be seen, and that one moment of being truly seen had opened doors Linda thought were closed forever. She pulled out her phone and found Patricia Morrison's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. This was it. The moment where she decided whether to step through those open doors or stay in the safe, small life she'd built. Linda thought about Tom, about what he would say if he were here. She could almost hear his voice. "Stop being scared, Lynn. You were meant for more than this. Go be magnificent." She pressed the call button. "Patricia? Hi, it's Linda. Linda Chen. I'd like to talk about that grant. And maybe everything else too." On the other end of the line, Patricia's warm voice said, "I'm so glad you called. When can you come to my office? I have so many people who want to help you." Linda smiled. A real smile. The first one in longer than she could remember. "I can come today," she said. "I think I'm finally ready." 3 months later, Linda stood backstage at the Community Arts Center, her heart pounding in a way that felt both terrifying and familiar. She was wearing a simple black dress that Patricia had helped her pick out. Nothing fancy, but it fit well and made her feel like herself. The real herself. not the invisible version who'd scrubbed floors. Tonight was her first public performance in 7 years. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, it wasn't even a major venue, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was here, and she'd chosen to be. Professor Harrison peeked through the curtain. There's about 200 people out there. Some music critics from the local papers. A few of your new students came too. They're excited to hear their teacher perform. Linda took a deep breath. Her students? That still felt surreal. She'd been teaching at the conservatory for 6 weeks now, and every day surprised her. The young people who came to her studio were talented and eager, and reminded her why music mattered. Nervous? Professor Harrison asked with a knowing smile. Terrified, Linda admitted. What if I mess up? What if everyone realizes that night at the Ashfords was just luck? It wasn't luck. You know that? He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. But even if you do make mistakes, so what? That's part of being human. That's part of art. Perfection is boring. Truth is what moves people. Linda nodded, trying to let his words sink in. The truth. She'd spent so many years hiding, trying to be invisible, afraid of being seen. Now she was choosing to be seen. Choosing to be vulnerable. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. The stage manager gave her a 5-minute warning. Linda walked to the side curtain and looked out at the audience. She could see some familiar faces. Patricia Morrison in the 3rd row. Some of her fellow faculty from the conservatory. A journalist from the paper who'd written a beautiful piece about her story. And there in the back row she saw them. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. Linda's breath caught. Why were they here? Mrs. Ashford looked uncomfortable, like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Ashford kept checking his phone. They hadn't come to support her. They'd come because not showing up would look bad. Too many people knew the story now. The viral video had made sure of that. For a moment, Linda felt anger rising in her chest. How dare they? How dare they sit in that audience after what they'd done? After the way they'd treated her? But then she took another breath and let it go. They didn't matter. Not really. They were just 2 people who'd been cruel because they could be. Because society had taught them that people like Linda didn't deserve respect. But Linda knew better now. She'd always deserved respect. She'd just forgotten for a while. The lights dimmed. The stage manager gave her the signal. Linda walked onto the stage. The applause was warm and welcoming. She sat at the piano, a beautiful Yamaha concert grand that the Arts Center had recently acquired. She adjusted the bench, flexed her fingers, and looked out at the audience. Thank you all for coming tonight, she said into the microphone someone had set up. 3 months ago, I was cleaning houses and trying to stay invisible. I'd convinced myself that part of my life was over, that I didn't deserve to make music anymore because I'd failed somehow, because life hadn't gone the way I planned. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But someone once told me that perfection is boring. That truth is what moves people. So tonight I'm not going to try to be perfect. I'm just going to tell you the truth. Through music. These pieces I'm about to play are all ones that meant something during different parts of my life. The good parts and the terrible parts. I hope you'll listen not just with your ears, but with your hearts. She turned to the piano and began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, Tom's favorite. She played it the way she'd played it in that hospital room, with all the love and grief mixed together. When she finished, she didn't wait for applause. She moved straight into the next piece. Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. This was the piece she'd been practicing the day she got the call about Tom's diagnosis. She'd never been able to finish it that day. But she finished it now, and it felt like closing a door that had been left open for too long. Then came Rachmaninoff. The same prelude she'd played at the Ashford mansion, but different somehow. That night she'd played it with anger and defiance. Tonight she played it with understanding, with forgiveness, not for the Ashfords, but for herself. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. Linda could feel their attention like a physical thing wrapping around her. But she wasn't playing for them. She was playing for the version of herself who'd given up. For Tom. For every person who'd ever felt invisible or worthless or broken. She ended with a piece she'd written herself. Something she'd composed in the practice room at the conservatory late one night when she couldn't sleep. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even finished, really. But it was hers. It was honest. And that made it beautiful. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence. Then the audience erupted. People were on their feet, applauding and cheering. Some were crying openly. Linda stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She looked toward the back row. Mrs. Ashford wasn't applauding. She sat with her arms crossed, her face tight. But Mr. Ashford was clapping slowly, and there was something in his expression that might have been shame, or regret, or maybe just discomfort at being confronted with his own failure as a human being. Linda didn't care which it was. They didn't have power over her anymore. After the concert, people crowded around her. Her students wanted to take pictures. The critics wanted quotes. Patricia Morrison gave her a long hug and whispered, "You were magnificent." Professor Harrison waited until the crowd thinned a bit, then pulled her aside. "Linda, I have some news. Remember that music festival in Vermont? The one I mentioned? They want you to perform next summer. It's a prestigious event and the exposure would be incredible for your career." Linda felt a flutter of excitement mixed with anxiety. That's amazing and terrifying. "You'll be ready?" Professor Harrison assured her. "You're already ready." As the reception wound down, Linda noticed the Ashfords leaving. Mrs. Ashford hurried toward the exit, but Mr. Ashford lingered near the door. He seemed to be working up the courage to approach her. Finally, he walked over. Up close, he looked older than Linda remembered. Tired. "That was a beautiful performance," he said stiffly. Linda waited. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, I wanted to say. He cleared his throat. "What my wife did that night was wrong. What I allowed to happen was wrong. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry, it wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something." Linda studied his face and saw genuine remorse there, buried under layers of pride and discomfort. "Thank you for saying that," Linda said quietly. "I hope you treat your next housekeeper better." He nodded and left without another word. Linda watched him go and felt lighter somehow. She didn't need his apology, but it was nice to have anyway. Patricia appeared at her elbow. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, I feel free," Linda said. "For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. Not the person I was before everything fell apart, but someone new, someone who's been through the fire and came out stronger." Patricia smiled. "You know what I love most about your story? You didn't need anyone to rescue you. You rescued yourself. We just opened a few doors. You're the one who walked through them." Linda thought about that. It was true. The grant had helped. The teaching job had helped. The support and connections had helped. But in the end, she was the one who'd had to decide she was worth fighting for. She was the one who'd had to believe her life could be more than just survival. 6 months ago, she'd been scrubbing toilets and trying to disappear. Now she was teaching students, performing concerts, and planning for a future that felt full of possibility instead of just obligation. Mrs. Ashford had tried to humiliate her that night. Tried to prove that Linda belonged in the background, invisible and powerless. But instead, she'd given Linda the greatest gift imaginable. She'd given her a reason to stop hiding. Linda looked around the arts center at all the people chatting and laughing and celebrating. She thought about her students waiting to work with her next week. She thought about the Vermont Festival and all the other opportunities that were starting to come her way. And she smiled. Not because everything was perfect. Not because all her problems were solved. But because she was here. She was seen. She was alive in a way she hadn't been for years. The music had always been inside her, waiting. She just needed to remember that she was worth listening to. And now, finally, she believed it.